Good afternoon. I'm Mike Petrilli, president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and welcome to a special webcast that we're having on the new TNTP. In fact, that is even our hashtag. You can follow along at hashtag new TNTP to follow this conversation that we're having with TNTP's Daniel Weisberg. Daniel, welcome to the webcast.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here.
You are the new CEO.
That is correct.
Of TNTP. I like that. It's only a very fancy title. That's very nice. That's good.
Not original, though.
Not original, no. Well, what we're going to do for the next hour, maybe less, but maybe more, is to talk about TNTP, about where it's been, where it's going, as well as some of the policies that you all have been promoting. Now, to be clear, I have criticized some of those policies, especially some of the teacher evaluation work. So we might get to have even a little bit of a debate as we get in here. But let's start out, first of all, by you telling us, TNTP is basically about 20 years old now.
About, yes.
Started about 20 years ago by Michelle Rhee. I think our audience knows who that is.
Yes.
And originally, the New Teacher Project was about helping big school districts recruit new teachers. So tell us, how did you guys get started, and how has it evolved in recent years?
Yeah, so thanks again, Mike. So I'll give you a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of the history of TNTP, and I think what you'll hear is a story about an organization that started from trying to solve a very significant problem for kids and has built on that base to expand into trying to solve other problems that are obstacles to all kids getting a great education. So we started, as you said, Mike, trying to solve the problem around teacher pipelines, about recruiting highly qualified teachers into the profession in the wake of the requirements for highly qualified teachers and No Child Left Behind. You had a lot of large urban districts that woke up and realized, like New York City, the district where I worked for 6 years, 17% of the teachers were not licensed at all. They were essentially people who could be hired off the street, and that those teachers were concentrated in the highest need schools, the schools with the largest percentages of poor kids and kids of color. So TNTP sprang up to try to help solve that problem by recruiting very successful people, mostly career changers, people who had been in other fields for a number of years but had a passion for teaching, putting together a very selective process for getting those people into a program, having a very rigorous and intense training process over the summer, and then through alternative certification, providing certified teachers mostly in shortage areas, in places where districts across the country have trouble recruiting. Math, science, special ed, bilingual. And we have done that for the better part of 20 years and continue to do that, and will continue to do that.
Let's pause there just for a moment.
Sure.
People out there may know these programs by some of their brands, right? That these are teaching fellows.
Teaching fellows programs.
Right. New York Teaching Fellows programs. One of the things I've loved that you've done over the years is really learn about what it is that attracts these great career switchers into teaching. And it's not sugarcoating the job.
It is.
Right? What are the messages that have worked?
You know, it is not. I mean, it's a profession that teachers will tell you if you don't really have a passion for the mission, it's not one you're probably going to enjoy, because you're working in conditions where it tends to be really cold in the winter and really hot in the summer, and you don't get a lot of you don't have a very big budget. You're often, unfortunately, dipping into your own pocket to buy basic supplies. If you don't really have a passion for helping kids and working with kids, you're not going to get very far. So I mean, part of what we did that's exactly right, and I think it was pretty innovative, when we were beginning to recruit these people into education, we didn't sugarcoat it at all. But what we talked about is the profound impact they would have. So, we said is that, we had taglines like, I bet you remember your third grade teacher, who's going to remember you in 20 years, right? And some people who maybe were successful in other fields but weren't especially fulfilled were drawn to teaching. So fast forward, we saw a fair amount of success. And again, I was on the other side of the table in New York, where the Teaching Fellows programs and Teach for America were really a lifeblood for us in trying to change that system. We began, as we were doing this work, to see other obstacles, policy obstacles. So we were supplying these big urban districts with what we thought were highly qualified, successful, talented candidates. And very often we were finding they were getting lost in the system. That there were various rules, policies, practices that were preventing those teachers from getting into the right places under the right conditions. As a concrete example, even though we would have great, highly qualified special ed teachers, very often they'd have to wait until after the school year started to actually get hired by districts, because districts had these very Byzantine, very often contract-driven policies around internal seniority transfer processes, and then before they could even hire anybody externally. So we began doing policy advocacy, writing reports, calling out these lessons that we had learned from the ground. And really what we were trying to do, Mike, is drive pragmatic, non-ideological, non-partisan solutions, just kind of common sense. Does it really make sense to wait until very late in the season to start hiring your external candidates when, frankly, they're probably the really good candidates are probably already going to have a job elsewhere? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't help anybody.
And don't be modest here. I mean, this had a huge impact. I mean, many of your studies, and I say this as somebody who runs an organization that puts out studies and tries to get attention for them, your studies have had enormous impact. Remember, I forget the name of the one now that you're referring to 10 years ago about the pipeline and about the timelines. But showing that, oh my God, these urban districts are losing people, and oftentimes to suburban districts, or people who want to work in the toughest environments, but they just never got a call back.
That's right.
Or they were told that they wouldn't know if they had a job until August 15th.
Right.
And meanwhile, these suburban districts could act faster and offer a job on May 1st. And so what are people going to do?
Exactly, Mike. And one of the things we know from research and from our own work, and common sense would dictate, but in this case, research backs it up. The later you hire in the season, the less effective the candidates tend to be when they actually get in the classroom. Great talent has a lot of options, so you got to jump on them early. So in any event, that was a piece we added. So we were doing teacher pipeline programs, also doing policy advocacy. We continue to do both of those things today. In the last 5-6 years, we have built out our capability to partner with districts, with charter management organizations, with state departments of ed around strategic planning and implementation across the human capital spectrum. So we're getting calls now to do everything from central help districts, let's say, or CMOs, state departments of ed do central office reorganizations, everything from that to re-engineering their teacher compensation system to now doing principal preparation programs. So we have built out, and I'm very proud of our expertise and the team that we have, which is really our special sauce. We have 350 plus staff members spread across the country, working in 50 different school systems on various aspects of these problems. So we now have pretty much a full service organization supporting both strategic planning and implementation. Very important. We both know that most of these initiatives end up failing in implementation across the human capital spectrum.
Wasn't there a time when you were actually going in and more or less running the HR function for some of these big systems?
Pieces of it. And, this is one of the, we still think of ourselves very much as a scrappy entrepreneurial little engine that could, but the fact is, we're at a decent scale for a nonprofit with 350 plus staff members. And that gives us the ability to take on big projects. So, for example, in Memphis, now Shelby County Schools, for a number of years, our team was doing the teacher recruiting and selection and staffing. By the way, very proud of that work for two reasons. One, it really had an impact. So you have a district that typically, like virtually every other major urban district, was opening the year with substitutes in front of the classroom, hundreds of classrooms, tended to be the highest need kids. We know that that's not going to be good for kids. Now they are opening every year, not only fully staffed with teachers who are rigorously selected, fully licensed in every single classroom, but they're hiring from a bigger pool of applicants so they can be more selective. They are sourcing great candidates to their highest need schools, so their turnaround schools, rise zone schools are doing really, really well. And they're being hired through mutual consent. Like the way we operate in the rest of the world. You want a job, you apply for a job, you go in an interview, the principal decides you're the best candidate for his or her school and his or her kids, and you get hired. So big success, and we are stepping back from that work, and very important to us, the district now has the capacity to move forward with that work. So that's great.
This is, and it's interesting. I mean, there's definitely been some talk in policy circles about how What's happening in Memphis? The I-zone schools, which are district schools,
Yes.
seem to be doing very well. These are
Yes.
turnaround schools. In fact, better,
Yes.
some people would say, than the achievement school district schools. And maybe this is a big part of the reason why.
Yeah.
You are helping them get much better teachers in place. That's
Yeah,
exciting.
I mean, certainly most of the credit goes both to the district leadership, the teachers who are doing that work in the trenches and principals. But sure, I think they would say part of the puzzle has been, traditionally high need schools get the last of the litter. They get the leftovers after the schools that have a better story to tell maybe about the challenge level of the kids. You get first pick. In Memphis, they flipped that. So the I-zone schools get to go out and recruit the best candidates early on in the hiring season, and that has been one of the things that's allowed them to really, as you say, Mike, outpace the district improvement. The district has been improving on student outcomes, but also the state, which is really exciting. Really exciting.
So tell us a little bit about your background. You've been at TNTP
Yes.
now for several years, but even before that, you've got a little bit of a provocative background
Yeah.
education reform.
So yes, I'm a career changer myself, like some of those teaching fellows. I am a lawyer by training. Cue the boos and hisses.
Yes, I got some jokes ready for you.
But am a proud product of the New York City public schools. Have been, a passionate supporter of public education for a long time. When I was practicing law in Los Angeles, I started a volunteer program where we took professionals called Career Ambitions, took professionals from downtown and had them go and guest teach classes and mentor kids in South Los Angeles. And so I have always been involved, and then got the great good fortune in 2003 to get recruited by Joel Klein, the then new chancellor of New York City, to be his chief of labor strategy and implementation, and worked there in New York City under Joel, who is a great friend and mentor, and was a great boss for 6 years as we were going through what was then the most aggressive reform experiment in the country, and learned a tremendous amount there. I was responsible for being lead negotiator in collective bargaining with the various unions. I can't even remember how many, but a few dozen, and being responsible for various talent initiatives that we had. And talent was one of certainly Chancellor Klein and Mayor Bloomberg's major pillars.
And so you are the guy sitting down at the negotiating
Yes.
table with the unions, including the teacher unions.
Correct.
Right? So tell the world out there, are you one of these teacher union bashing reformers? Are you out to break the unions?
Absolutely not. I mean, I would say probably one of the things that I'm well placed to say after having done this work not just in New York but now in a number of districts across the country, that if somebody waved a magic wand or an evil wand, depending upon what side of the spectrum you're on, and suddenly teachers unions didn't exist, our problems would not be solved. We would still have huge fundamental problems in how the quality of education that we deliver to kids. Now, having said that, are there cases where unions are an obstacle to progress? Sure. And that's true in education, it's true in a lot of places. Are there situations where unions are actually helping to aid progress? Absolutely. Depends on leadership, depends on the context. So I would say in New York City, we need a lot more than 1 hour to talk about that story. It was a long and interesting road. But although it was acrimonious at times, and I actually don't regret the fact that sometimes the issues were very contentious, because I think we needed to bring these issues up in the public forum. Overall, when you look back, we were able to accomplish a lot together. The city, New York City DOE, teachers union, principals union, and other unions, by the way, because we had about 135,000 employees, and literally, Mike, 134,000 of those employees were represented by unions. So if we couldn't develop productive relationships, they didn't have to be necessarily relationships that were filled with love, hugs, and kisses, but productive relationships with our union partners, we would have been stuck in the water.
All right, so that is quite a history, both on the organizational side and the personal side. So now what comes next? You're just taking over TNTP. You going to keep doing what you've been doing, or are there some new things in store?
So the answer is both. So we're gonna continue to work on teacher prep and teacher pipelines. We continue to be very proud of the work we're doing around our teacher fellows programs and our teacher certification programs. We now, as I say, have principal preparation programs that we're very proud of, and we're going to continue to do this human capital consulting across the spectrum. What's new is that first organically and now much more deliberately, we're beginning to support school systems on academic strategy. So we are working with a number of school systems, both districts, some charter management organizations, and some at the state level on policy as well, around implementation of Common Core or whatever the applicable standards are in the state. And this, it's very exciting work. It's very scary work. But ultimately, the vision for us is to work in places where we can help support both the planning and implementation of an integrated talent and academic strategy. Because when you have great people in front of the classroom and in the principal's office who are very talented and well supported, but also are teaching to high quality standards with high quality curricula, getting really good feedback, then you're going to see really dramatic gains. If you just deal with academics by itself and don't deal with any of the talent issues, or frankly, you just deal with the talent issues and you don't think about academics at all, you'll see some gains, but they're going to be limited. So what we're trying to do is work on both, and that's very exciting.
I think this is music to the ears of my colleague Robert Pendicio, who's out there saying, did they just say curriculum?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, we've been saying maybe finally 2015 is going to be the year of curriculum reform, the year when the education reform movement wakes up to the importance of curriculum. So tell us more about that, because I think one critique of TNTP could be that some of what we've heard over the years is it's all about talent. You get talented people in there, they're going to figure it out.
Right.
And what have we learned? Have we learned that, sure, they can figure it out, but faster if there's a strong curriculum to pair them with?
Yes. The short answer, Mike, is yes. If you have a great teacher, that great teacher is going to figure out by hook or crook how to make sure that every single kid in his or her classroom is getting what they need to succeed. But that often, if you don't have a good academic infrastructure, curriculum, assessments, feedback, a clear vision for what excellent instruction is, if you don't have those things, it's going to take a Herculean effort. Now, we're lucky to have a lot of Hercules out there in the classroom, but can't build a system around superheroes or, mythical gods. So yes, we are now moving into this area in, I think a disciplined, measured way. We're not going to suddenly start, figuring out bell schedules or doing bus routes or purchasing of textbooks. Like, those are things that don't play to our core strengths. But we are good at gathering data, analyzing data, presenting in ways that decision makers find to be useful. And I think this is really important, Mike. We're pretty good, based on our almost 20 years of work, at figuring out how to translate central initiatives, strategies, strategic plans, translate those to the classroom level and to the school level. So if you're adopting Common Core as a state or a district, new set of standards, you're adopting a new literacy curriculum, how is that actually going to be processed by the teachers who are going to have to carry it out, by the principals who are going to have to carry it out? What is their capacity? Where are they operating now, and where do they have to go? And then, really importantly, what are those interim steps? Like, we are not going to get to the end state, in 10 seconds. We have got to go through some steps to get there. And so that's the work, in addition to the human capital work, in addition to the teacher pipeline work, that we're very much immersed in now, and it's very exciting.
Well, I hope you look at the Engage New York materials, right?
For sure.
Which we at Fordham reviewed a few weeks ago on the English language arts side and thought very highly of. And of course, Kaya Henderson, who was one of your key alumni, that in Washington, D.C., they have been busy developing what many of us think is a great curriculum around the Common Core. You just got to get them to share it. Tell Kaya, share this with the public. We want to see it.
Open source.
Open source it, because it's supposed to be pretty darn good. And especially on the literacy side, look, us at Fordham, we firmly believe that one of the big pieces of low-hanging fruit is to teach a content-rich curriculum in the early grades, is to bring back history and art and music and science and literature, starting with kindergarten, with the read alouds, and that we've done a much better job in this country now teaching the decoding and the phonics and all of that. Where we're hitting a wall on literacy is that we just haven't done a good enough job teaching kids about the world. So when they pick up a piece of text, they know what it's about.
And we tend to agree. Now, how you ensure, what are the right strategies to ensure that kids, particularly coming from poor families are picking up that knowledge that they need. That's certainly open to debate. There's not one right way to do it, but the fact that they need that knowledge, they need that context, I think is almost beyond debate at this point. It should be. But this is where you get back to talent.
Yeah.
And this is true in elementary school. It's certainly true. It's at the secondary level. If you have somebody who really doesn't have the content knowledge teaching, it's going to be very difficult for them to help kids to understand the concepts, to help kids to really do critical thinking. If you are not comfortable yourself doing college level English, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful with rigorous standards.
Yeah.
Teaching kids high school English.
That's right.
So we have some gaps. We have some gaps on the talent side. We have some gaps on the curriculum side, the assessment side, and the number of places. I think the thing that makes me optimistic is you do have a number of places. DC is a great example of it that are really trying to grapple with both, and we didn't see that 10 years ago.
So just to remind people, you can follow along the conversation at #NewTNTP. I'm also open to taking some questions and would love to put them to Daniel here. So if you've got questions, send them in. I am following along on the phone, so send that in. Shall we talk about teacher evaluation? This is
one more thing, Mike, if I could just, before we get to teacher evaluation, I'm not avoiding the question, I'm actually looking forward to it.
Good.
The other thing that we're doing, I just want to put in a little plug for this. As we have worked, again, we're working in 50 different district, state departments of ed, charter management organizations. One of the things we see as a constant struggle, and it was a struggle for us when we worked in New York City, is the best, most authentic, most effective ways to engage with the community that you serve. Everybody, every superintendent I know spends a lot of time on community engagement.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't want to figure out ways to really connect with communities. But most of them aren't experts in engagement. They haven't grown up doing, organizing and advocacy at the grassroots. And most of them don't have teams that do that. One of the things we're going to begin to do is advise our clients on the most effective ways to engage with the community, because we are lucky to have people, unlike me, who spent time in grassroots organizing, in grassroots advocacy, and are very, have a very good sense and a high level of expertise about, what are the issues that this community as a whole is putting at the forefront right now. What are the messages that are going to resonate based on the conditions of the community? What are the messages that are people are really going to react negatively?
Less ready to give up on districts.
Right.
And I'm pretty much there or close to it. That when you talk about some of these big urban districts, I mean, DC is maybe the one shining example of a district that seems to be getting better and sustaining change. New York under Klein, and now there seems to be, not surprisingly, we're going backwards again. So what do you say to people who say, come on, this is hopeless, you're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. There's no way these big urban districts, because of their politics and their governance and their size and everything else, there's no way they're going to be able to have real impact. Why don't you just focus on high quality charter schools instead?
So I'd say two things, Mike. One, I think we actually don't know. And, I love Andy. We've had great discussions and debates about this. I respect his opinion, the opinion of others who think, we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I disagree. One, I don't think we have enough of a sense of possibility. This partly comes from our work. I was just talking about the incredible strides that Memphis, Shelby County Schools has made down in Tennessee. If you had asked a bunch of people, maybe including me 5 years ago, can we take a big, very high-need urban district and get them to the point where they're opening school with their vacancies fully staffed, regular teachers in the classroom, hiring through mutual consent in a very efficient way, cutting down the timeline from God knows how many days to 10 days for the applicant. Can they do that? Are they capable of doing something that takes that kind of sustained effort, that kind of strategic thinking? Most people have said, no way, can't happen. And I think, 5 years later, you'd have to agree, like they really have made tremendous progress. Now, that's one initiative, I get.
And it's in a right-to-work state.
It is in a state, yes. I mean, some of the enabling conditions are there. We could probably find, I could tell you war stories from New York, which is not a right-to-work state. But in any event, the point is, I think we'd be leaving a tremendous amount on the table if we didn't see what would happen if we work with districts with strong leaders with the right enabling conditions on both talent and academics. I do think we can do a lot better. But here's the other practical reason. And I have lots of friends in the charter community. We do a lot of work with charter schools. We're going to actually be doing more work with charter schools. So I'm a big believer in the charter movement. But what I say to my charter friends who, make the argument about, why don't we just forget about districts? I say to them, how many kids can you take on next year? How many schools, what percentage of kids in your community are you serving right now? 10%, let's say, for a big CMO. What can you get to next year? 12%. What are we supposed to say to the parents of those kids? Right? The other 88% of kids who are, going through the system right now. Now, I don't know ultimately, I don't think any of us knows whether we can get districts as they are currently constructed, and schools, frankly, as they're currently constructed, to consistent excellence for all kids. I don't know if we can get there. I do know we can do a lot better. And that may not be the most inspiring line, hey, let's do better rather than let's do great. But doing better helps a lot of kids. That's where the kids are.
Yeah. No, look, I agree with that. I mean, we sometimes poo-poo this idea, well, unless it's transformational and breakthrough and, look, incremental progress is better than no progress.
It absolutely is.
And if you're talking about, back to the analogy, turning the Titanic, it takes a while, right?
Yes.
And so it's exciting to see the work that you're doing, find out whether you can have more successes like in Memphis.
Right.
All right, so arguably the biggest impact TNTP has had in recent years was with your report, The Widget Effect. Came out in 2008, 2009?
2009, yep.
Incredible timing, right before suddenly Race to the Top landed in the lap of Arne Duncan, $4 billion, and quickly had a huge impact on the design of that competition and its focus on teacher evaluations. When you think back to that time, put in your own words, what was your vision for what you were trying to do or hoping the country would do around teacher evaluation?
On one level, Mike, it was pretty simple. We knew from lots of great research that had been done at that point for probably more than a decade that the single biggest school-based factor in student academic success or failure was the effectiveness of the teacher. That was the biggest lever we had in education. And when we looked, again, our reports all draw from our practical experience on the ground, working with teachers and principals and, district leaders, et cetera. And we're looking at that saying, okay, and by the way, there's also huge variation. Not only are teachers the biggest school-based factor in student academic success, but there's huge variation between teachers in terms of their performance, and we know that from research.
Both within schools, between districts, but even right next door.
Right next
classroom
door. Exactly right. And maybe that was counterintuitive, but indisputable.
Right.
And so we're looking at that research, and then we're looking at the landscape and the policies, and we're seeing a set of policies that are based on the assumption that one teacher is as good as another. That's why you would hire people based on seniority rather than based on their whether they can demonstrate they're effective for the job, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why you'd have an evaluation system that says everybody's Lake Wobegon, everybody's above average. In fact, everybody's good or great. There's only two shades. There's only two flavors of ice cream, great or good, and that's it. And so as we're trying to think ahead, all right, how are we going to get from a system where you have huge variation in teacher performance, and by the way, the kids at the wrong end of the achievement gap tend to have more than their share, disproportionately high share of less effective teachers, and a disproportionately low share of highly effective teachers, how are we going to begin to change that? And what we came to is, well, you've got to have some fair, reliable system of telling you how teachers are performing. And that's both, serves a developmental purpose. If teachers don't know how they're doing and they don't know what the standard is they're shooting for, how are they ever going to improve? It's only going to be through kind of serendipity that they're going to improve. And then for the people who are responsible for leading the schools and systems, how are they going to know where they need more talent, where they need to develop teachers, where they need to promote teachers and retain them if they don't have a system to measure? So it was kind of a simple thought process. And then, of course, we began to study the issue, and we didn't think we were going to find that things were great and these evaluation systems were working well. We knew that, but what we found was really shockingly bad.
Even worse.
Yeah.
So what you just described, that doesn't sound so bad. You're saying, look, we want to get information, we want to give teachers information, we want to give principals information. But is it fair to say that to the field, what they heard as these ideas and initiatives started rolling out was, we're out to fire the bad teachers, right? Eric Hanushek says if we fire the 5% worst teachers,
Right.
we can close the achievement gap with the rest of the world. And now these people are out to fire bad teachers.
Right.
Was that miscommunication? What happened there? Why was that the message that so many teachers heard?
Yeah, it's I think it's a combination of at least two things. One, let's remember there were people out there who were deliberately sending that message, if you can find reformers, we'll go back through the last what would it be now, the last 6 years or so, who are saying the purpose of this evaluation system is to fire bad teachers. That's why I'm adopting it. Or even this is the chief reason why I want to do it, and then there's some other subordinate reasons. That's not the message reformers were sending. It wasn't the message we were sending. We were certainly saying, look, that's one of the things that happens is that you get, and how do we know this? Teachers are telling us. We're surveying tens of thousands of teachers. One of the things they are telling us is it's very frustrating that we have low performers and nothing happens to them.
Right.
But having said that, you've got, I think, we among others probably didn't do the best job of messaging, and if we could look back, we'd probably think of ways to do it. Now look, we came out with a subsequent report, the Irreplaceables. That was our very next big report, which was about what? Retaining the best.
Yeah.
And so, we were doing our level best to say, look, there are there's multiple purposes here, but you also had interest groups that, weren't interested in change. You had teachers legitimately who were looking at some new system, didn't have a lot of confidence in the leadership maybe of their district or school, who were wondering whether it was going to be arbitrary and whether they really would be fired for bad reasons. That's legitimate. You're going to get that. And here's the thing, Mike, and you and I have had a little discussion about this. It's just basic change management principles. When you are proposing any major change,
Yep.
Human beings don't like to change. The first reaction is never, that I'm really excited about. This first reaction is, my goodness, this threatens me in some way.
Right, and we all understand that, teachers working within a dysfunctional system,
Yeah.
no fault of the teachers,
Right.
have reason to worry that, oh my God, are these idiots up the food chain going to do this right or not? And so, sure, if you had confidence that they're going to actually identify the bad teachers, the colleagues of theirs that were not doing a good job and need to leave, great, but that confidence wasn't there. But then, and again, this isn't on you, Daniel, but the administration, the Obama administration, in the Race to the Top program, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure what they said was not only do we want states to be developing these teacher evaluation systems, but we want them to be consequential, that you had to commit to not just building, it couldn't just be a feedback system, right?
Yes.
It had to actually then be used for some high stakes decisions.
That's right.
Was that a mistake?
I don't think there's any way to prove that it was or it wasn't, but I would argue that it wasn't, and I'll tell you why.
Not a mistake?
It was not a mistake, okay. And I'll tell you why, Mike. This grows largely out of my experience working in a big district, a big, hairy, complicated district, and then working with a number of districts. It's an extraordinarily hard job. Whether you're a teacher, principal, administrator, somebody in the central office, you can spend every minute of a very long day, of a 14-hour day, putting out fires. These are big, complicated, often under-resourced, systems. You can spend all day doing that. If there aren't consequences attached to any initiative, it's pretty easy, and I was guilty of this when I worked in a district, of putting that initiative in the bottom of the pile. So I get it. Logically, it makes sense to say, wouldn't it have been better to start out with a soft approach, no consequences attached, just start to try out this system, see if you can start to differentiate between teachers. Build the system, get it out there, and then when people are comfortable with it, then you start attaching stakes. So my opinion, which again I can't prove, would be if you had done that, you would have seen two things. One, pretty half-hearted attempts at building the system, because there are no particular consequences to it. If you didn't build a good system, nothing bad really would happen to you. And there are many other priorities. You've got many other fires to put out. And second, when you did start attaching stakes, 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, 10 years down the road, you'd hit the same firestorm you hit initially. So to me, you're better off, and by the way, with Common Core, I would argue you've seen some of that same phenomenon. In other words, Common Core, the standards have been out there for a while. They haven't been hidden, by Park and Smarter Balanced and the architects of it. But until the assessments come online, you don't see a lot of focus. States and districts it could have been out there for the last 3-4 years, really working on Common Core aligned curricula and training for teachers and principals. For the most part, and I understand why. That's not what they're doing. When the assessments come online, now you see the urgency.
Now, let me keep pushing on this a little bit.
Okay, please.
Because certainly there is an argument out there that says the timing of all of this was really wrong. That, for one thing, you had this teacher evaluation thing, which was very scary to lots of teachers, and it hit at the same time as Common Core. Right. And that, especially in a state like New York, that had an abbreviated timeline on Common Core, these two things hit at exactly the same time, and that is why we have this huge backlash now in New York. This is why you had this huge opt-out movement from parents, because Andrew Cuomo said, I'm sticking with the teacher evaluations, I'm sticking with the stakes, I'm sticking with 50% based on test scores, to hell with you all. And as a result, we've got this big opting out. And so many of us who feel very strongly about Common Core and have been fighting the political battle to just keep it in place, feel like, damn it, this would be a lot easier if teachers weren't afraid that these reforms together were going to be threatening to them and to their livelihood. That if we were hitting the stakes around teacher evaluations a few years from now, Common Core has been implemented, the teacher evaluation systems have been built. We have learned from some early mistakes on the teacher evaluation front, some of the bad decisions that got made. We've ironed those out. All of that is much more doable. We are in a much better place on education reform than we're in today in a place like New York.
So it's possible. I mean, I certainly wouldn't say that that's an illogical argument. I think it's a decent, persuasive argument, but I would ultimately argue that it's wrong. Here's what I would predict based on my judgment, is that if you had done that, Common Core rollout certainly would have been smoother. You would have gotten less blowback if evaluation weren't online at the same time. Although I think there still would have been pushback, and I think there are those who would have fought against it, seeing what the next shoe was that was going to drop. But I certainly would agree you'd have a smoother rollout. Then once you began to attach stakes to it, and that stakes, it's not just about evaluation, it's about school accountability, it's about district accountability, principal accountability. Once you began to attach stakes to it, then you would see the same attacks on testing, the same attacks on the standards, the same attacks on federal overreach that you have now. And I guess the question is, and I think this is a very legitimate question to debate, is if you had kind of stretched out the change management process. So first we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. Would you end up in a better place than doing New York? I think is a case study, and I don't think we'll know. Jury's out. Let's look at it in 5 years. I don't know where we'll be in New York, but would you ultimately be better off because you had stretched out that process than trying to truncate the process, navigate through it as best you can? And of course, I'm a New Yorker. I get 2 kids, who are taking these tests, and for all the talk about opt out and so forth, I don't actually see huge risk that the state is gonna end up pulling out of the testing consortia, or pulling out of the standards. So time will tell, Mike. This is what I would say.
No, that's fair. Although, if we still keep having a quarter of the parents opt out, I mean that is terrible for many education reforms.
It is.
I mean, we suddenly don't have good information on school performance, right? We suddenly don't have good information on teacher performance, right? That is a really tricky one. Let me ask you this. Are you optimistic that in a state like New York or some of these other states, let's say, that tend to have stronger teacher unions, that we are actually going to get to a point where it is going to be possible to lay off ineffective teachers? That is, that seems to be, again, from some reformers, the holy grail. And again, I've been skeptical that as long as the unions are as powerful as they are, that you're able to actually get all the way there.
Here's what I would say, Mike. What we ought to be driving towards is, and look, we have not shied away from this. This is not probably the number one challenge, but it's a significant challenge. When you have, as we see in our data set, many data sets, Rick Hanashak has certainly written very compellingly about this. You got in some places 40% of veteran teachers who are operating below the level of a first-year teacher, and we know the first-year teachers are generally less effective than veteran teachers. And you have 40% of your veteran teachers operating below the level of a new teacher. That's a problem. That's a significant problem for kids. Now, it doesn't mean you suddenly want to cut 40% of the teachers, but if you don't somehow figure out how to improve those veterans or exit them, you're gonna see a lot of kids who are going to suffer as a result. But here's what I would say we ought to be driving towards: is not a situation where if you have large chunks of people who can't do what is a very, very difficult, complex job, you take them through a disciplinary system and you fire them in a formalistic way. In high-performing organizations, what you tend to get is people who opt out. Speaking of opt-outs, this is a good opt-out, where people see, hey, this is the performance standard, this is the culture. It's a culture of high expectations, not only for kids but for adults. I don't think this is for me. I'm going to go do something else. That's where you want to get. Now, to do that, to have that culture, and this is what we hear from teachers over and over again, there has to be some accountability for people on the bottom.
Yeah.
So if the people who really clearly are not cut out for the job are allowed to get another group of kids assigned to them, and another group of kids assigned to them, it's demoralizing for everybody else. Some teachers are going to need to be let go in a formal way, but it shouldn't be many.
Yeah.
More important.
And I totally agree.
Yeah.
And by the way, I love what you did in New York City to focus on, hey, let's identify those low-performing teachers before they get tenure.
Yes.
Because as long as we've got 2 or 3 or 4, certainly 5 years before they get tenure, that's plenty of time to figure out who the high performers and the low performers. And you guys started denying tenure to teachers, which was, nobody does that anywhere.
Revolutionary idea. Yes, yes.
But I guess I want to go back to this question. I understand the argument, and I agree with you that there need to be some teachers are going to need to be exit the system. I am still not convinced it's going to happen in my lifetime in a New York, in a California, that some of these battles, they're just not worth fighting because they're not going to be won.
Yeah.
It's all or nothing, right? That if what is the old saying? If you shoot at the king, you better be sure you kill him or whatever. But instead of just riling up and emboldening the unions and having this big brawl that we're having with Vergara and the other lawsuits, with the that is just not there's not a clear path, at least in some of the bluest union. The bluest states where the unions are the strongest.
Yeah.
Am I misreading that?
No, well, you're certainly not misreading that it's a very tough fight. And the fact that we have litigation, we have the Vergara case, is a symptom of the fact that it has been so difficult to put in place common sense job protections. I mean, I don't hear very many people, if any, certainly not the Vergara plaintiffs, saying that we should just get rid of any job protections for teachers. Mm-hmm. That's not what they're saying. Let's just put in place some common sense protections. I don't think anybody would argue that having protections from teachers being arbitrarily fired for political reasons, fired for reasons that are just illegitimate, nobody would, but there's a big gap between that kind of common sense protection and what we've got in many places now. But here's what I would say, Mike, that makes me somewhat optimistic. That over the long term, I don't think this is all going to turn around overnight, but over the long term, I think we can change those laws. If you look at, and you probably have, if you look at the Vergara trial, and you look at the final closing arguments that the lawyers made, the case was so clear, just on logic and common sense, that the way the laws are currently constructed in California, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't serve the interests of teachers, the interests of kids, parents. It just doesn't make sense. Now, if common sense dictated policy change, Washington would be a very different place, right? So just making that argument is not going to see things change. But I think if we're persistent about it, I think even in blue states, even in New York and California, I can imagine a place in 10 years where you've got some much more practical job protection for teachers.
And to be clear, that you can make progress on pushing the timeline for tenure back. And in California, clearly they need that. And again, being aggressive about making real decisions before a teacher gets tenure. And the unions support that, right? Yeah. Pushing against the LIFO stuff, right?
Yes.
Again, I mean, we've seen real progress on that. There's broad support for that. And by the way, there's still plenty of places where you look at the demographics, they're going to have layoffs. Right. We saw the birth rate plummeted during the Great Recession. So a lot of these schools are going to have fewer kids coming into them. Right. They're going to need to lay off teachers. Can we get away from doing it last in, first out? So those are all ways to make progress on these issues, but without, again, scaring the heck out of the tenured veteran teachers who have little faith in the systems. Last question on evaluation.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't a principal get to decide how he or she evaluates teachers? I mean, wasn't it forever that we in the education reform movement, the focus was we want to hold principals accountable and we want to give them a lot more autonomy, the charter model. And suddenly they have to deal with these evaluation systems built at the state or district level that are telling them, it feels to me like we're trying to principal-proof our schools.
Well, so here's context that's important. We have had a system where really for a lot of years principals have really controlled the evaluation system in a lot of ways, meaning that the sole input into evaluation and teacher evaluation was principal observations. Now, by the way, some principals did a great job with that, both from a developmental point of view and from an evaluation point of view.
And by some, you mean very few.
Very few. Very few. I mean, Mike, we're seeing this now. So we say, gosh, we've gone through all this, Sturm and Drang and aggravation, and then we see the same kind of widget effect outcomes on evaluation systems, and you deconstruct those evaluation systems, what you see is, in many places, the inflation that you see in scores where, again, everybody's good or great is because principal observations are extremely, extremely high. Now, that's not because principals are, don't care or they can't actually distinguish. We work with a lot of principals. Almost every one of them can distinguish great from good, good from fair, fair from poor performance in a pretty accurate way. There's a cultural aversion to doing that separation.
I also have a hypothesis. This is my U.S. Department of Education hypothesis from working at the U.S. Department of Education, where we tried to bring in a rigorous evaluation program and Well, guess what? People have tenure in the federal government at day one. Right? You quickly learn that you can't fire anybody. And so managers learn, why am I going to create bad blood with this employee by giving them a negative evaluation when I can't get rid of them? So I'm just going to give them a good evaluation. And I was skeptical of that at first, but I've seen it. I mean, I've seen lawsuits and all kinds of other employee complaints that come from giving somebody a mediocre evaluation. So, in these school systems, again, if the principals feel like, whatever I give to this teacher, I still can't get him or her out of the classroom. You can say it actually makes sense. Probably, it might even be the smart thing to do to give them a decent rating.
It might be the rational thing to do. Anyway, the point I was making though about why not just devolve the authority out to the principals, let them evaluate. Someday, I hope we can get there. I think it's a better system. I don't know of a first to force a change in thinking. And by the way, this is not just about evaluation. If all you do is evaluation and you don't put forth any changes, again, around standards for kids, curriculum for kids, culture in schools, expectations for teachers, if you don't do any of that work, then all the evaluation work in the world is not going to change things. But I think some disruption is good. And one thing we could probably agree on, even on evaluation, is the evaluation work was disruptive. I would say probably in a healthy way, mostly. You'd probably say in a not strategic way.
It was mixed. It was mixed. All right. No, thank you, Dan. That was very helpful. All right. We do have a couple questions out there. The first one is from Resource Ed, Michigan, from Detroit. Wants to know if there are some examples, I guess, other than Memphis, where you see districts doing a good job identifying and recruiting teachers. What's working out there? Are there some good examples?
Well, I mean, I would say DCPS, we're sitting here in Washington. I think they have done a tremendous job of turn, and this is the thing. We got very short memories. People don't remember what DCPS was like. You probably do, but a lot of people don't. People don't remember what New York City was like, in the 1990s in terms of the school system, and I get that. But DCPS went from probably the worst performing urban district in the country, or arguably, certainly one of the 3 or 4 worst, and their talent operations were bad. And the conventional wisdom was, we can't recruit. How are you going to recruit great talent to this dysfunctional system? And fast forward 8, 9 years later, and this is a place where it's very interesting. And Mike, I'm sure you have these conversations with our friends in the charter movement. They are now having trouble competing with the district for talent. Like, it's a challenge. Some of them are winning that competition, but there's real competition.
Partly because DCPS can spend $1 bazillion a year.
Yes, but they could have spent $1 bazillion a year 10 or 12 years ago, and they weren't in strategic ways. Now they are. So I think DCPS, if you look at the talent coming in, now I get it. The DC area is a talent magnet generally, so they would, I mean, Kaya would be the first to say we benefit from that, but still, I think they're doing an excellent job in recruiting talent. By the way, both...
Reminds me, Dan, by the way, I just have to share with this.
Sure.
I once saw a presentation and somebody was making this point about Washington, D.C. It was a picture of the Capitol Dome with the headline, Talent Magnet. And I thought, nobody has ever shown that before, ever in the history of the world. We don't generally think of Congress being a talent magnet. That's not what they meant. But the city as a whole.
I'm not sure that's what the first thing people think of these days when they see a picture of the Capitol. But point taken. Houston Independent School District is it's the 5th largest district, I think, in the country, the 7th largest district in the country, and kind of flies under the radar when it comes to reform. They have done, in full disclosure, we've worked with them for the past 5 years. That's partly why I know. A very similar story to the story in Memphis, where there was very unstrategic, very inefficient recruiting of teachers, and now they have what I would say is a state-of-the-art system. And again, it's not only about opening the year, making sure all your teacher vacancies are filled, it's filling it from a much bigger pool, being more selective, hiring through mutual consent, having high standards. So they're one that really hasn't, I mean, they've won the Broad Prize a couple of times, so it's not like they haven't gotten any accolades, and they deserve them, but I think probably not enough has been talked about in terms of their talent.
So you hire a lot of teachers.
Yes.
Are there some ed schools out there doing a good job producing teachers who are ready for this challenging job, especially in tough urban areas?
So, boy, it's a good question, and I don't, I'm not close enough to the work to say, this particular program, is particularly good. But I would say this. I mean, certainly there's some. Our friends at Relay, I think, deserve a lot of credit.
And by some, you mean not very many.
Not very many.
Yes.
Not very many. And I think what's great to see is you're starting to see people from higher ed come out and do the first thing you have to do to try to spark change, which is to acknowledge that we've got a real problem. And you weren't seeing much of that even 5 years ago, so that's good. But what I would say is, and look, we're in the teacher preparation business ourselves, I don't think any of us should feel good about whether we are doing a good job preparing teachers both for how to manage a classroom, which if you can't do that, you're not going to be a very successful teacher, and there are teachers who aren't prepared to do that, particularly in high-need environments, but also to be able to do what Common Core aspires for teachers to do and for kids to do, which is to really help kids to do the critical thinking, to understand the concepts underlying the work that they're doing, to really do higher order work. Are we doing a great job of that at TNTP? I really don't know. We're trying, we're grappling with it, but I couldn't say that we are. And as higher ed generally,
and you do some of the training, and in a few states are even allowed to certify teachers.
That's
right?
correct.
But in most places, they have to go off to some university at night.
That's right.
And I guess a lot of people in the Teach for America world certainly have always complained that many of those programs are not high quality.
That's right.
It does seem to me that there's a sense in the education reform movement that the next big thing to tackle is teacher preparation. And the problem is nobody knows exactly what to do with it. Who's got the leverage? Is it the states? Some people end up saying, it is the school districts that have leverage. Why don't these superintendents go to their local ed schools that are producing most of the people that they end up hiring and demand that you have got to get with it. You've got to give us people who are ready on day one, or else we're not going to hire your people. We're not going to give them student teaching assignments. We're going to cut you off. I mean, have we seen that work anywhere? Are there any other ideas you have on how to push ed schools? I mean, let's assume most of them, they want to do a good job. They want to produce teachers who are going to be successful.
Absolutely.
So how do we get there?
So here's the thing, and we used to think about this again in New York City, right? We were hiring a tremendous number of teachers, every year. So we had tremendous buying power with the local universities. Yeah. But first of all, if you're going in and presumably what you're demanding, as you say, Mike, is you want them to be well prepared on day one, you better have systems. If you have more than 2 or 3 schools, you better have systems that tell you which programs are doing a good job. Yeah. Guess what those systems are? They're evaluation systems. Yeah. Very few districts have evaluation systems that can give them that data, that can tell you, hey, University A, actually doing a really good job producing effective special ed teachers. University B, not doing a good job. So you need that data, and we don't have it. Here's the larger changing and increasing on the profession. And so we're all running around trying to figure out, how do we produce great teachers on day one who can do all the things it takes these days to be a great teacher? And it's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot, yeah.
And I think what we have to start thinking about, while we do that work, we can all do a better job, including TNTP, in preparing teachers for the rigors of the classroom. Start to think about, is this job constructed in a realistic way?
Yeah.
Is the right way to construct this job is to have one teacher who's great at presenting information to kids, who's great at designing assessments, who's great at data analysis, great dealing with teachers, great dealing with colleagues, great on content, all those things with no help at all.
Yeah.
Is it realistic?
Sounding a little bit Rick Hess-ish right now.
Well, oh goodness. Well, Rick just got a pain right here when you said that.
Yeah.
He likes to think of himself as unique, our friend Rick. But
you just have learned from him. Yeah, but to allow this role to be different.
And we don't innovate very much around that. There aren't many radical ideas.
Does that mean in the districts where you're going to be working on this sort of talent, academic piece together, do you foresee that technology, that blended learning, is that going to be something that's going to be a part of the conversation?
It's got to be a part of the conversation. There's no question about it. I mean, you just look at other professions, and you look at what's happened over the last 40, 50 years, and the tremendous productivity that's been unleashed as a result of technology. I mean, this is not an original thought. You guys have written about this, others have written about this. And then you look at education, our productivity has actually dropped. Mm-hmm. In other words, we have more heads per kid than we used to have, and we're not getting much better results.
Speaking of heads, Leona Hameson's head just exploded. You're saying that because, of course, you're referring to that we have been raised. We have bigger class sizes.
Our student-teacher ratio has dropped by about 20+% since 1970. So we are hiring a lot more
Smaller
teachers.
Classes, I should say.
Yeah. So right. There's got to be a way, particularly now, Mike, this is the thing, and I don't at all pretend to have the answers about this, but there's got to be a way when there's such a tremendous demand now among teachers for rigorous content. One of the reasons Engage New York has had, how many millions, you guys wrote about this, of downloads? 2-3 million? Yeah, I mean, a tremendous demand. And probably how many of those are from practicing teachers who are out there just looking for great content? There's such a demand. And the idea that we say to teachers, one by one, and go out there and find it and then figure out the best ways to present it, as opposed to saying to teachers who are teaching 7th grade English, okay, here's a unit that you can download that has great content, that has great assignments for kids, essential questions for kids. You can modify it and you can figure out how to make it work for your kids, but you don't have to do all that work. And we don't do a good job using technology to do that. I mean, if you put a teacher in a time machine from 1875 and had them arrive at 2015 and look at the classroom, they'd look around and they'd pretty much say, okay, I'm comfortable with this. If you did that with a surgeon, right, they'd have no idea. They'd think they were on the moon, probably. And so we need to figure out much more powerful ways to use technology to help our teachers.
It's like that chalkboard they discovered in Oklahoma the other day it was like from 1917, I think, and it still had a lesson on it. And you could go back and see, and it probably not so different from what a math chalkboard might look like.
That's right.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today. Super informative. Tell all your friends and colleagues and family about this. This will be up on our website right away and on YouTube, that people can watch it to their heart's delight. Looking forward to this next chapter of TNTP.
I really appreciate it, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. It's Mike Petrilli at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.